Tonight we're going to talk about more magic mushrooms. Oregon is the first state in the nation to set up a regulatory framework for legal psilocybin services. And if you're not aware, psilocybin is the hallucinogenic substance found in certain mushrooms that make them magic, or causes you to see or hear things that aren't actually there. Yesterday, we talked about how the application process for psilocybin licensing is now open across the state, with the expectation being some of the places where you can actually eat these mushrooms are going to be open later this year. Now, at the end of our segment, we asked you for your thoughts and questions, and as always, you did not disappoint. Thank you. So tonight, we're going to highlight some of your emails and voicemails and answer a few of the questions that you had. We're also going to do what this show does best. We're going to go deep into this issue and pull out facts about the process that we think that you should be aware of. Some might seem a little bit silly. Others, though, are things that you definitely do need to know about when it comes to the fine print of this legislation. Let's start with a voicemail from a viewer named Steve talking about these new psilocybin services coming to Oregon.
I'm totally in support of this. I really think this has great medical possibilities for people with depression, anxiety. I'm just really happy that Oregon is leading the forefront in this, and I think it's nothing but a very, very positive step.
Thank you, Steve. But a viewer named Susan said, no, thank you. This is something I would not try unless for some reason my physician recommended it, she wrote. I'm not depressed or have clinical OCD, but then I've never felt the desire to try marijuana either. We'll have some more of your comments coming up, but let's get into some of the nitty-gritty of the psilocybin services law that are notable. We'll start with some manufacturing rules, which is the start of this entire process, since, you know, the mushrooms have to be grown in the first place. Manufacturers cannot use manure, wood chips, genetically modified organisms like bacteria, or chemical synthesis to grow these magic mushrooms. That's pretty nitty-gritty, eh? Focused down on what they can and cannot use to grow these things. And it should come as no surprise that pesticides are also prohibited in that growth process. Another important note is how you would take in the psilocybin products. Manufacturers have to design their products in a way that they can be consumed by eating it, or an enteral method. I'm laughing because I practiced that and still messed it up. So this method means that it has to pass through your intestines, so you gotta swallow, I guess. That means they can't make psilocybin patches for the skin or things like nasal inhalers or sprays or injections. They can make edibles, though, but there are strict rules around that because they cannot be perceived as targeting children. That means they cannot make products in the shape of an animal, vehicle, person, or character. For all you millennials out there that love the Flintstone vitamins, that means you're not going to get a Flintstone psilocybin edible. That's a big old yabba dabba don't, per state law. Now, let's talk about where people can eat the mushrooms. They're called service centers. The state says they can be open from 6 a.m. until 11:59 p.m., with the caveat being that someone's trip needs to be finished by 11:59. They can't be administering the psilocybin at like 11:45 p.m. and kicking people out at midnight. The place must have an alarm system with at least 2 panic buttons inside. They also need to have video surveillance on the premises, except in the place where the people will be using psilocybin for privacy reasons. But the law does allow people to have their administrative session recorded via video, audio, or both, as long as the person gives prior written consent. By the way, if you go for that, the center cannot charge you more to view the recording of yourself on your trip. Now, let's recap how the process will go for you, the client. The only requirement is that you're at least 21 years old, and it's important to note that you do not need a prescription or a medical referral. Your first step will be a preparation session with a licensed facilitator, which can be done in person or virtually. It has to be done at least 24 hours before you plan to take the psilocybin. There will be several forms to fill out as well, so be ready for that requirement. And once you do the initial prep session, you will not have to do that again at the same service center for a year. So if your first experience helps you, you can go back to the same place and skip the paperwork for a year. Another part of the preparation session is completing a transportation plan, and this is part of the process that has some of you concerned.
We do not need another drug behind the steering wheel. We have marijuana, we have alcohol, and then we're going to have mushrooms. People go into these centers to use this product, and it's under the watchful eye of someone, and then they're going to go out and get in their car and drive. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Bad, bad for Oregon.
Thank you for that. You'll have to sign your transportation plan, by the way, which is really just a description of how you plan to safely transport yourself away from the center after the administration. I was going to say how you're going to safely get home, but maybe you're not going home. This is after the time that you ingest the psilocybin. The plans will advise you not to drive, and facilitators are supposed to make reasonable efforts to prevent you from driving after a session. If you're insisting on driving, though, the facilitator has to make reasonable efforts to resolve the safety issue. If they cannot do that, they're supposed to call the authorities. And if you refuse your own transportation plan, facilitators are required to document that. We speculate that would affect your prospect of receiving another appointment at that facility, but the law does not say what is done with that documentation. And that brings us to the nitty-gritty of the actual administration session, which is the only time when psilocybin products can be consumed. There will be specific eating areas, and you're required to stay in those areas throughout the session. The facilitator has to be with you the entire time. They can't just watch you on video, for example, from another room. They also have to maintain visual and audio contact with you. They cannot use video equipment remotely. And the only time that person would not be with you is, well, if they need to go to the bathroom, and in that case, they have to stand outside the door and wait for you if you're going to the bathroom. Now, if the facilitator has to use the restroom, they can only be gone for 5 minutes or less, and another licensed worker has to be available to monitor you in the meantime. Yep, the state really did spell all of that out. Now, there are options for group administration sessions, doesn't that sound fun? As well as outdoor sessions. Each comes with their own requirements. Group sessions have client to facilitator ratios that are all determined by how much psilocybin the clients are taking. The more people are taking, the closer the ratio needs to be 1-to-1. The group sessions can be 25 people or fewer, but cannot go over 25. Outdoor sessions have to be done in a designated outdoor area on the service center property, and the boundaries have to be clearly marked with, quote, visible signage or barriers. And no matter how big these service centers are built to be, they cannot host more than 100 clients at any given time. The duration of these sessions also depend on how much psilocybin is consumed. The sessions last from 1 to 6 hours, and the more you take, the longer you're going to have to stay. Once your time is up, or if you think your trip is over, you'll have to sign a release document saying you agree to end the session and you agree to follow your transportation plan to get home. That was a bunch, huh? Well, there's more. You can even then take part in an optional integration session to talk with facilitators about more support or other resources that could help you. Those integration sessions can also take place a day or two after your trip. Now, let's get back to some of your questions after our segment aired last night. Steve asked, hey, what happens if my administrator gives me my mushrooms and I take them and say, bye-bye, I'm leaving? What can they do? Well, it's a great question. We asked OHA for answers to those questions. In each case, she pointed us to a lengthy law on the books, so let us just boil down the answer that she gave us. In the case of Steve's question, the answer is basically the facilitator is required to make those reasonable efforts to resolve the situation, and if that fails, immediately contact, quote, appropriate emergency services, which we assume would be the police, and they're going to have all your information anyway, so just don't do that, okay? Our next question came from Irene, who wondered, will these products and or services be taxed like they've taxed marijuana? The answer to that is yes and then no. Yes, because there will be a 15% tax on the sale of all psilocybin products, and no, because the psilocybin market is not a dispensary model like we have now with cannabis. You can't just go buy psilocybin, take it home and use it like you can with cannabis. You have to buy it inside a service center and then use it right there as they watch you. But as far as the tax, that's the yes. And finally, Al asked, so can we presume this new business will be cash only and facing the same roadblocks that cannabis faces, unable to use the banking system? Well, the OHA rep noted that they cannot speak to questions on banking, but they followed that up with this. We expect that similarities with cannabis regarding banking will exist for psilocybin licenses. So, cash only? Yeah, probably. Now, if you missed it yesterday, the idea is that some of these facilities will open later this year after the licenses are approved and distributed. So, It's really not that far away. And we would love to hear any other questions you have about psilocybin services here in Oregon. Or if you've experimented with mushrooms before and you want to tell us about your experience, we'd love to feature some of those stories as well. Send us an email. Our address is thestory@kgw.com, or you could call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.